Hello and welcome to ChooseFI. Today on the show, we have our good friend Jillian Johnsrud back, and we're going to talk all things mini retirements. Now, there's a whole lot to discuss here because this is a topic that is really top of mind with a lot of people in the FI community who are thinking about how can they organize their lives around things they value and how can they spend their time as they see fit and not wish away the 10 or 15 years to FI. How can you rethink that? How can you have other possibilities? And Jillian is quite literally writing the book on this, and she has a ton of information. And this is just going to be a really free flowing conversation about, like I said, all things mini retirements, but also a lot into what Jillian's been up to in her own life. And I think you're going to find this of really great interest. So, with that, welcome to ChooseFI. Jillian, welcome back to ChooseFI. It's always good to see you.
Man, thanks for having me. It is always fun to be back.
Yeah, this should be great. So, okay, let's start with what the heck you've been up to. You've had quite a year. So
Yes.
can we rewind the clock? Maybe the last time you were on and what you've embarked on since then.
Yeah, so we've always had this dream of traveling in the winter. And over the last 10 years, we've been kind of scaling it up and doing more trips and doing longer trips. The year before we did 12 weeks, which up until that point had been our longest trip. And this year we did 8 months. 8 months.
Wow.
Me, my husband, our 5 kids, our numerous pets in like a 26-foot camper, living on the beach for 8 months was our life and going to Legoland.
Repeatedly going to Legoland, or what
Oh
are we
my
talking about?
gosh. We went every week for months. And my
Really?
daughter last week was like, I really miss Legoland. And I was like, because we didn't go enough? Like, how many times can we go to this place?
Oh my goodness. So it's funny. I talked about a story about my daughter, my older daughter specifically, and how much she has become a roller coaster enthusiast and how we built this into a lot of our travel plans, but also some of the financial and life lessons that I've been teaching her. And even to the point of she wound up getting in touch with the general manager of our local amusement park. And now she's like friends with the general manager and
Oh
they
my gosh.
correspond back. It's the most wonderful, amazing, special thing like you've ever seen in your entire life. And it's like my proudest moment as a parent. But I have been, Jillian, to more amusement parks in the last 12 months than I have in my entire life combined previous to
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
that.
Um, I am a person that didn't really learn to have fun as a kid. I've heard the saying that you either learn to have fun or learn not to have fun from your mother. I definitely fell solidly in the learn not to have fun camp. And so for me, traveling with my kiddos and doing all of these super fun things all the time, every day is kind of like exposure therapy. Like they're teaching me how to have fun. And I feel like I get kind of a do over of like, yes, this is what it is to be present in the moment and to have fun and to do silly things. And I'm getting a re education.
That is really interesting. So I suspect that's going to resonate with a lot more people than you would otherwise think, because I know it's resonating with me right now. Tell me more about that. Like, how can we build more fun into our lives? I think a lot of us maybe get caught in that, like, doing, that striving, the succeeding kind of mindset. And maybe, sadly, fun has gotten put to the back burner at best, maybe the far back burner, right? Like, and that could have been from childhood on. So I know that's a lot to ask. So Jillian, unpack fun, but I mean, realistically, like you said, you've actually been learning about this over the last 8 months.
Yeah, I think for me, and I think for a lot of Americans, especially kind of the Midwestern background, generationally, we weren't people who prioritized fun. We were people who prioritized survival, and like farming and ranching is a tough gig. And it's kind of not to be overly dramatic, it's very like life or death touchy. There's just a lot of stress, and you have to be very diligent. You have to be very hardworking and very focused. So, like, frivolousness and fun, not the priority. And so for me, I'm taking the cues from my kids because kids are naturally so good at fun. It's the adults that are like, okay, stop it. Like, this is annoying. We don't have time for this. Like, we need to move on to something else. So, taking more cues from them and whenever, people are nervous about traveling with their kids, or how is that going to go? They like the idea of it, but they also don't want it to be a disaster, because sometimes it can be a disaster. I always encourage them to practice, like practice in your hometown and practice taking your kids' lead. What do they want to do? What do they enjoy doing? What's fun for them? And can we find the fun along with them? And we have a rule for our kids when we travel. We started this maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and we have a little chat before we go do anything. It's like our little theme, our mantra. And I was like, okay, the reason we're doing this is to have fun, for everyone to have fun. So how do we make sure everyone has fun? That includes parents. And so we go through, like, all the kids will shout out, like, we listen, or we follow the rules, or we don't act crazy, or we stay together. And I'm like, yes, this is how we're all going to have fun together, if we kind of help each other out and make this a good experience for everyone. Because if we're not all going to have fun, then I would rather not do it. And we
Yeah.
kind of have our little team chat, and it goes really well. Like, they get into it, and it makes it easier for me to also have fun with them if they're not being insane.
Yeah. I mean, I think that them understanding that it is quite literally not just about them,
Yes.
right, is so important, because I think a lot of families, I think a lot of parents only prioritize the kids, especially on some of these trips. It's like, oh, how do you mollify them, or how do you keep them busy and entertained? And you often don't think about yourselves,
Mhm.
right? Or what's going to make this enjoyable or even palatable.
Yeah.
I'm kind of setting this up in a weird way, but I keep going back. I think these amusement parks are like the perfect
Yes.
microcosm for this, right?
Yes.
Because you can go overboard. You can stay there for 12 hours and you basically want to just curl up in a ball and cry for the next 12 hours. Or how can you make this, like you said, fun for all of us, fun for the parents as well? And that might mean, hey, we're going to go to the park for 3 or 4 hours. And you know what? We're going to get those stamps. We're going to go back to the Airbnb or the hotel. We're going to relax. We're going to get some food and drink, and then come on back in the evening when maybe the sun isn't blaring and the crowds aren't as significant, right? So, like, okay, there's two different ways to do this. There's the maximization, or there's the, hey, let's maximize our life satisfaction around this. And yeah, it's an interesting way to look at it. And I think, just last word on amusement parks for me, I think they can actually be a pretty frugal hobby, if you will. Especially, like, I'm not going to speak for you, but based on the number of times you went to Legoland, I'm assuming you got some type of season pass or annual
Yes.
pass, and they're really reasonable.
Oh, yeah. We are like, we are the kings of season passes. We hold so many season passes to so many things: zoos, science museums, history museums, car museums, because my husband loves that. We were in Southern California, so we got a season pass to Legoland, to the San Diego zoos, to SeaWorld. And so when we're planning these big trips, we kind of say, where might we be for a few weeks or for a month, and what makes sense? Because, yeah, San Diego Zoo to go once is like $70 a person, or to get a season pass is like $90 a person, or 150. And so we go 8 times over the couple months. And it does take the pressure and the stress off of being there. That, for us, that's one of the biggest values of a season pass, is that we can go for an hour or 2 or 3. And if things start to go sideways because they're hungry or they're tired, we don't feel like we're losing money by just leaving early and coming back another day, trying it again.
Agreed. Wholeheartedly agreed. And yeah, we do that with my daughter. So the King's Dominion is our local amusement park. And yeah, we'll go. It's a 28-minute ride. I mean, literally door to door. We go for 2 hours and we come back, and everybody's happy. Nobody is overtired or exhausted. And yeah, speaking of different annual passes, because this is another kind of frugal thing. Rex wrote in. I'm glad I was able to dig this up while you were talking there. And Rex said, my family supports our local zoo and natural history museum. One of those is up for renewal, and I was looking through the benefits of being a member. It turns out that zoos and museums often belong to reciprocity associations, giving you free entry or discounted entry and other places belonging to this association that are outside of your local area. So he said, we're going to Santa Barbara, California in a couple of weeks. We'll be getting into their Natural History Museum, aquarium, and Moxie Science Center for free, and the zoo 50% off. So yeah, there's a bunch of these. I know
Yeah.
there's museums, there's, I guess, zoos and aquariums and science and technology centers. So yeah, this is that's another neat thing for people who are travelers,
Yes.
is by supporting your local museum, zoo, science museum, art museum, etc. Like Botanical Garden is another one that we've
Oh,
done
we've got
also,
a
and
botanical garden yearly pass. We have
you've got
all the
everything.
yearly
Wow.
passes. And it doesn't even have to be a local one. Like, we don't have a botanical garden where we live. We don't have a car museum. So we go to these places and we buy their season passes. And then on a trip, we might hit up 10 or 15 botanical gardens because that's my thing, a couple car museums because that's my husband's thing, and dozens of history and science museums.
I'm sure. I'm sure. So yeah, that was cool. We managed to talk about some life hacks in here. That's really neat. And yeah, just built around, like we said, built around fun. How do you reorganize and think about the entire family? And I suspect so. This trip. So I know you said you were in Southern California for a large portion of this, as evidenced by the frequency of the Legoland trips. But
Yes.
it was, at least as I understand it, it was like a larger trip, right? Like you actually traveled some of it predating the California stop, right?
Yeah, well, we traveled down, and so we spent a little bit of time in Salt Lake and Las Vegas. We did kind of San Luis Obispo area of California, kind of down south. One of the reasons we stayed in Southern California for such a long stretch, and we've talked about this before, mini retirements can have a lot of different intentions, they can serve a lot of different functions. And this one for my husband, he got to go back to school, to college, and he got to take a few auto mechanic courses. And my husband is such a car nut. We currently have two classic cars sitting in our driveway. We've always had a classic car. He just loves mechanics so much. So for him to be able to go back to school and take these classes was like, it was like Christmas morning. He was so excited, and just to give him that opportunity, I think, especially, he's 45. We have 5 kids. Like, the amount of time to really follow a huge passion and a huge lifelong dream as your kids' lives expand and get busier, it's easy to deprioritize, your own dreams. So to carve out this little bit of space for him was really special.
Wow, that's incredible. And yeah, that can be truly a lifelong pursuit, as
Yeah.
evidenced by, you said he's been at this for many, many years, decades, and there's no reason he can't tinker with his cars for decades to come. So
Yeah.
that is really neat. Yeah, it's funny how there's just a little bit, there's something for everyone out there, right? And I think also part of exploring life and maybe mini retirements, which we're obviously going to talk about a lot here, and just maybe the FI mindset generally is, all right, it's a big wide world out there. There's a high likelihood that unbeknownst to you, you had blinders on for a long time because you're just kind of living your life and you're doing the best you can. But this is both a wonderful thing and a slightly overwhelming thing as well, as it is a big wide world. There's a ton of things to do. And you realize time is short and you want to explore. You want to do all these things, but it can be overwhelming. So I think one of the ways to do this and to not wish away until tomorrow. I think that's what a lot of people do. Sadly, even after listening to this podcast for hundreds of episodes and me trying to drill into people's heads that you can't wish away the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. You just can't. It's not the way it works. You can't just wake up when you hit FI and expect life to be wonderful. It simply does not work that way. And you have to try to build fun. You have to try to build that life that you want to live into while you're on the path to FI. And Jillian, I think something that I had never considered is this concept of a mini retirement. And I know that's something that is near and dear to your heart. So I want you to kind of just run with this, and then I'll ask questions intermittently, but you are truly the expert on this.
Well, one thing to kind of tag on what you said there, in the book, I have a section about like 10 things to kind of expect or things that go awry. And one of them is this idea of, if you've been on the path to FI and maybe there's 15 things that you're like, when I'm FI, I'm going to do all these things. And you've kind of postponed starting them because you didn't have the time or the space or the mental or emotional bandwidth to focus on them. What we sometimes don't expect or realize is that there's a high failure rate of trying something new. You try a new hobby, you try a new interest, and sometimes you like it and sometimes you don't. Sometimes you thought you would enjoy this and it kind of falls flat, or it's just harder in the beginning, to start any new habit, any new hobby. There's a learning curve. And so all of the struggle is kind of upfront. Or if you tackle these 15 new things, it can be a little demoralizing. You're dealing with a high failure rate where in your professional life, you were probably extremely competent and you had a very low failure rate. 95% of the stuff you worked on was awesome and everyone knew it was awesome. And now you're like just muddling through, and people can get this kind of discouragement of, well, why the heck did I leave this good paying job to just kind of be disappointed a lot or let down? Like, I didn't love my work, but at least I was making money. And now I'm spending all of this money I've saved to like realize actually I don't enjoy running that much. I don't think I want to run a marathon. Like, it's not my jam anymore. So mini retirements are great, and because they can let you test out two or three or four things. And out of that four, you might find two that you love. And then you carry that over to the next one. You test four more and you find two that you love. So when you eventually become FI, you have these 15 things that you really enjoy and you're good at and you're competent at. And it makes that transition so much smoother.
Yeah, that is fascinating, and it's so accurate based on like my own experience of that high failure rate.
Yeah.
Right? You think, oh, I've dreamed of, like you said, running a marathon or fill in the blank, right? I dreamed of boating from New York to Florida or who knows, down to South America or something. And then you get on a boat for the first time and you realize you absolutely hate it and you're seasick, right? There are high failure rates. And I think just armed with that knowledge, Jillian,
Yeah.
will make it just that much better when that first failure happens, because you might think, oh, I'm a failure. I'm not even any good at pursuing what I want out of life. Like, what on earth is this? But yet, realizing that this happens all the time. People change their minds. People find new things. Like we said, it's a big, wide world. And just, again, being forewarned with that knowledge that it's okay. And like you're saying, you're essentially kind of split testing ahead of time
Yep.
your own FI life of, hey, I'm going to run these two things side by side and maybe they'll both be good. Maybe one will be dramatically better. And then I just cut that other one and then I keep on moving on. And eventually you're going to cull that list down to something that looks like a pretty darn good life. So, Jillian, just let's take a super quick step back and say mini retirement. Let's just define
Yeah.
what that is, because I suspect there are many people hearing that term for the first time. And I think I know what it means. I'm not 100% sure. How would you define that?
So, my definition for mini retirement is anytime there's three components. Anytime you step away from your 9 to 5 or your main profession for a month or longer to focus on something that matters to you. So, having these three elements, and you can call it whatever you want. You can call it a sabbatical, you can call it a gap year, you can call it a hiatus. I did kind of a year off, and in my mind, I was like, this is hiatus feels like a word that fits more because I know I'm not leaving forever. I'm just pausing and then I'm coming back to the same thing. So, however you define that, pick any word you want, but those three components really are what create that transformation.
Yeah, sabbatical is another word you
Yeah.
might hear fairly frequently, right? So, okay, so it's step away from your current job or life for a month or more for something that matters to you, and
Yeah.
that last one is super critical. And that's the part that's interesting. So, like, what would be an example of something that doesn't matter, that like wouldn't fit that? I know that's a weird question.
So, the thing about mini retirements is that when you think about it in the construct of this definition, you'll probably end up with one at some point in your life. You'll have a career gap, you'll have an opportunity where you might get laid off, you'll be in between. So, you have an opportunity to make it a mini retirement. But it could also very easily, if you get laid off, it could also very easily be being depressed and eating Cheetos and binge watching Netflix and being discouraged about the economy and playing a lot of video games because you can't get yourself out of this funk. It can easily go another way where you look back and you're like, well, shoot, I kind of wasted that 3 months of my life. Like, it could have been something cool, but instead it was kind of disappointing and lame. And even when you set out for a mini retirement, it goes by so fast and you really have to recalibrate. You have to refocus. You have to be really clear about your intention for the time. So it's very possible to have a break from your 9 to 5 for a month or longer that just feels like wasted time.
Mm. Is there a level of structure that you would advise someone to build in that would, I guess, lower the likelihood that it would feel like that waste?
Yeah, having the expectation for what the natural cycle of this is, especially if people are burned out. There's things that happen in kind of our body and our mind and our chemistry that follow a pretty consistent pattern. And so understanding what that's going to look like when you eventually like downshift, that you'll be tired and you'll sleep more and you might nap more and you won't want to be incredibly productive, and that's okay. You're just in part of that recovery process. But having a structure, because especially for people who, life had just been so busy and they're kind of in this achievement, accomplishment. Maybe that's their personality, maybe it's the profession they're in, where they just do 20 different things a day. To go from that to this very unstructured time feels a little disorientating. It feels uncomfortable. And honestly, most of us, we went to school, we had jobs. We haven't had a lot of practice structuring our time on our own. Our school or our job said, here's how you spend your time, here's what's important, here's what success looks like. And now we have to figure all of that out for ourselves. And it's good to have a game plan. Even if you're burned out, I encourage people to do something called like creating a plan for active rest. What activities are restful for you? And we'll map all those out. We'll brainstorm a list. Maybe it's taking a walk, going to a yoga class, having lunch with a friend, reading a book, doing meditation. And you write all these things out and you say, okay, I'm going to do 6 of these every day. And so at the end of the day, you've crossed all these things off your list and you can say to yourself, I did exactly what I set out to do. I did exactly what I was supposed to do to get the kind of outcome I'm hoping for. Because it can feel, if you're used to being hyper productive, like, I took a nap, I read a book, I had lunch with a friend, like, I feel like I'm wasting my life.
Right. But if you reorient it around, okay, this is part of that recovery. This is
Mhm.
active rest, but it's really not. Rest is maybe even like a slight misnomer in the sense that this is nourishing. It's
Yes.
nourishing your life. It's nourishing your soul. It's giving you energy. So it's find those activities. They don't have to be quote unquote restful as we normally understand that word of sitting on the couch or lying down and meditating. It might be, like you said, hanging out with a friend or going for a walk or going to yoga. I mean, nobody who's been to a yoga class would ever say that that is purely restful, right? Like, but it's wonderful and it can be nourishing and give you energy. So I like that a lot. Okay. So other ways that this can go wrong then. So you kind of alluded to that. I know there are a number of them. Are there a couple that bubble to the surface of, oh wow, when I see people contemplate mini retirements or go on their first, these are the couple that really bubble to the surface?
Yeah, I think it stems from a larger mindset of I'm just going to wing this and it'll be awesome. As long as I'm not in this job, as long as I don't have all of this stress, it couldn't possibly be bad. So there's a lack of preparation. They don't have a clear intention. They don't have a schedule. They don't really know how they're going to make it meaningful. And so you fall in these typical patterns of you're recovering from burnout. People can really internalize that. All of a sudden, they're not doing 20 things a day, they're doing 4 things a day. And they go, wait, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm lazy. Maybe I can't be productive outside of a job. If someone's not telling me what to do, I can't create something purposeful in my life on my own. And they see it as like a character fault. And so then the only solution is you got to go back to work. If that's the only place where you're successful and you thrive, well, off we go. So that's one, not having kind of a plan, the time can get away from you. And another one that pops up is having time off gives you an opportunity to deal with a backlog of things you've been avoiding, and you've been avoiding because they're kind of difficult. And now you have all of this time in front of you. So whether this is conflict in your marriage, whether it's the reality you don't communicate awesome with your kids, whatever these things are, can start to fill in that time. And people get in this mindset of, gosh, this is hard. And now I'm wasting my days. I'm not doing anything productive. I'm fighting with my spouse. I'm not accomplishing all the things I would wanted to accomplish. And even when I try, sometimes I don't like them. It turns out I don't actually want to learn Spanish. And all of this because we don't have a support system, because we don't have other people going through the same thing that can help us navigate this. all of this leads people to go, shoot, at least I was making money before. I should just go back to that because I like making money and I like saving money and I like investing money. And now I'm spending it all. And so having that, like, I'll just wing it and it will obviously be better than what I'm doing now, isn't the best strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously there are a lot of these potential pitfalls, but you mentioned something in there, find a support system.
Mhm.
And that's the one I wanted to drill down on because I think that's applicable not only to mini retirements, but just FI in general, right? Like you're the one who's reached the point of financial independence, and lo and behold, all your friends and neighbors are off working. And what do you do? Have I made a colossal mistake? Because it's hard to find that support system in your local area. I mean, I think, as we know, there are online communities. The ChooseFI Facebook group has 100,000 people and et cetera. But like, that's a whole different thing than having somebody 7 houses down who's doing the same thing as you.
Yeah, it's so important because there'll be a number there's the things you're trying to learn to navigate and there's a learning curve, which is why my book is called Retire Often. This isn't a one and done. Like, you're going to need to practice this a few times, and every time you practice it, you'll get better at it. It'll just go better each time. But there's also, you're dealing with all these pressures. I was talking to a client last night who's considering this, and his concern is what a lot of people's concern is: what are all my friends and family going to think? What are they going to say? Because I floated this idea by them. The response was not encouraging. All the advice I got was like, stay in this job, stay in this career path, like, just keep going. Like, why would you exit for a period of time? Like, you're going to lose momentum. And the reality is, for me, my perspective is there's no bad advice. There's just advice that will take you different directions. That advice is good advice for someone who wants to go a specific direction. Our job is, what direction do I want to go? And am I listening to the people who know how to get there? They know how to move in that direction, because you'll get a lot of advice if you leave your job. It's very, especially in American work culture, some other work cultures is the same. There's such a strong pull to employment and to work. There's a purpose, there's a morality to it, there's an identity to it. And if you opt out of that, even for a short period of time, it makes everyone else feel super uncomfortable. And in an attempt to resolve their discomfort, they will try to get you employed again. And so you might have this, like, you're kind of struggling, you're kind of adrift, and then all of these people are trying to pull you back. And so you do need that support and that community of other people who know what you're going through. The reality is, if you're struggling at all in a mini retirement, none of your employed friends will have any sympathy for this challenge. Oh, you have too much time on your hands? Oh, you're pursuing too many hobbies that you don't think are going awesome? Oh, you get to have too much time with your spouse to have conversations? Yeah, that sounds super tough. I'm really sorry for you. Like, they're not going to be any help. So,
Yeah. Yep. Zero sympathy.
zero sympathy. So you need people who get what you're going through, but also understand the vision that you want for your life.
Yeah. And having that vision and working through that vision and figuring out what that is. And like we said earlier, iterating and trying to figure out, there's not that one simple vision that you've set out and it's never going to change. I
Yeah.
think it's part and parcel of a learning experience of just being alive. And I know you mentioned in there some of the things that these, friends, neighbors, et cetera, might say is, oh, you're going to lose momentum. Now, that's an interesting one because I actually suspect that a lot of people who take the mini retirements have that exact same thought. Many of the other things are just them pulling back because they're jealous, but I suspect that's the one that resonated most deeply with me. And I think when we're contemplating, okay, what does a career look like? I want to take these mini retirements. And this now gets into the nitty gritty, Jillian, of like, okay, what does this look like? How do we do this? How do we negotiate it? But I think that losing momentum is top of mind. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, there's two perspectives. So, one, actually, I'll start with, like, worst case scenario. One of the things sometimes I do with clients, if they're like, if I, there's this idea of like, if I take a year off now, it's going to tack more years onto the end. Like, should I just push through? Compound interest, I'm going to end up with so much less money. And so we look at what exactly are the numbers we're talking about, because so much money is a really vague concept and it's hard to pin down. And so we'll run the calculations and I'll say, okay, so if you took this year off, when you're 70, instead of having, 6.4 million, you're going to have 5.2. This is going to cost you like $1 million. I want you to think through when you're 70, how you feel only having 5.2 and compare that to how you'll reflect on that year off and the things that you did and the time you spent with your family. And I can't make this choice for you, but which one of those feels more valuable? If you can kind of live in that 70-year-old version of yourself for a minute, which one would you regret? What path would you regret? And what path would you be excited about? So there's that worst case scenario that like the math is straight, ignoring the fact that taking a year off alters other things in your life. In actuality, when you look at how this plays out in people's lives, for a lot of people, and it doesn't make sense on the onset, it accelerates their path to FI. And one of the simplest ways is that in switching careers, if you leave and if you come back, oftentimes people come back at a higher salary. It then increases their lifetime earning potential a lot. I had one client in a strange turn of events. I told her to ask for a raise when she resigned. And she was like, I don't know if that's a thing.
When she
That,
resigned?
yeah, same day, same conversation, asked for a
Okay.
raise, a large raise, like a 20% raise. So not like a baby raise. And they
Right,
said
right.
yes, because I knew they would.
Of course.
But and then she got her mini retirement, but that 20%, her mini retirement was like 3 or 4 months. It set her lifetime earning trajectory on a whole different path that it massively accelerated her path to FI. If you take a month or 3 months, you might rest, you might travel, you might do those other things. But for people who take 6 months or a year, it gives you the opportunity to pursue things that you don't have the mental and emotional bandwidth for. And for some people, it just shifts their trajectory. They go into new professions, they start side hustles. For two of mine, mini retirements with my husband, we bought a house and renovated it. We ended up with 2 rentals. So the very practical math, he took 6 months off. It enabled us to buy an extra rental property. He wasn't earning a ton of money at that time. He probably would have earned $15,000, $20,000 for that 6 months. That rental property has appreciated by about 300,000.
Oh my goodness.
Massively accelerated our path to FI. So it's not always linear. The math isn't always as simple as we think about it at first glance.
Yeah. So right, not only the appreciation there, but then an income stream from the rental property
Mhm.
forever. I mean, talk about an amazing return on investment, if you will, and quote unquote. And that wasn't how you conceptualized his mini retirement, obviously. But if you want to just look nuts and bolts, that's an astonishing thing. And your point 2 minutes ago about, okay, when you leave and then you come back from mini retirement, and yeah, if you're getting a job at a new place, in all likelihood, you're going to get a significant raise. And it's such a bizarre way that the world works that most people who are loyal to their employer and stick around, they get their 2 to 4% raises every single year, which are these piddly little things. And we find again and again and again, the way to get those massive jumps are not to get a promotion at your current job. It's sadly to leave and to go to another place where you get those 10, 20+% increases. So the fact that you are actually making this overtly happen as part of your mini retirement is kind of a cool strategy that I suspect most people would never even contemplate, but that's a pretty good side benefit, right?
Yeah.
That's amazing. So, okay, I cannot let it go by because people are going to be kicking me of the client that you had resign and ask for a raise on the same day. So, we have to hear that story even if it's apropos of nothing.
So it's a really simple philosophy. And whenever I help people with negotiations, this is one of the core concepts is fairness. Like that is our word that we focus on. So my clients, what I would encourage anyone, like the responsibility is on you to do your homework, to do the research. Don't wait around for your employer to see how much you're contributing and like what the value of that is. They spend 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours, somewhere in there putting that together. So she came and said, hey, I want to leave. I'm willing. And part of the negotiation I do a lot of exit negotiations. Like I'm going to leave, but I'm going to negotiate this on the way out the door. In this exit negotiation, I'm willing to stick around for 4 months. I'm willing to help you out through this really busy season of our work and to make this a really smooth transition. In return, I would just like to be fairly compensated for the remainder of my time, which I believe is about a 20% increase based on this data that I have provided for you right here. And in these exit negotiations, like people think I don't have that much leverage when I'm leaving. But the reality is, you're coming to the table and saying, I'm willing to do all of these things for you. I'm willing to do these 6 specific things for you. In return, would you be willing to do a couple things for me? And they could say no, but when we balance it on that idea of fairness, like I would just like to be fairly compensated for the remainder of my time. It sounds weird to resign and ask for a large raise, but of course they said yes. Like, you don't want to lose a really critical employee during the busy time of year. It's hard to argue with just fair compensation.
Right. Basic fairness. And there's some level of reciprocity in there also, in
Yes.
that, in this case, right, the employee who you're coaching is not just walking out. They're not just saying, here's my 2 weeks or less, I'm out. I'm willing to stick around for 4 months and help facilitate this, right? And it's interesting how you mentioned the word fair. And I want people to really dial in on that, because everybody wants to be seen as fair.
Yes.
It's right that fairly compensated. It's part of this. There's a lot of these little things in the human operating system that just like they trigger. And it's funny because I mentioned reciprocity, and where that's most significantly featured is in Robert Cialdini's book Influence. And he has another one in there where he talks about, and I'm not going to get too in deep, but the human operating system is when you say the word because, you ask and then you say because, and then it can almost be like a nonsensical thing afterwards. They've done all of these psychological research studies on them, and it's like the likelihood of someone saying yes when you just say because, in essence, even if the reason is completely nonsensical, it increases it dramatically. And again, this is a financial independence podcast. I'm not going to get into I'm way out of my league with the social psychology, obviously, but that human OS. And there is something about fairness,
Mhm.
right? People don't want to be seen as unfair. So that's a really, really cool one, Jillian.
Yeah. It's really tough when you're saying, I'll do these 6 things for you, for them to be like, yes, I would love for you to do these 6 things, but I don't want to give you anything that you would like. So can you just do all of these favors for me and I give you nothing? Like, can we make that happen? Because people, you're right. There's a fairness side and they know they're being unfair and that feels really uncomfortable for most people.
Yeah. So, Jillian, negotiation wise, are there other things that we should think about, talk about on mini retirement negotiation? Where do we go from there?
So, another aspect that a lot of people take for granted, there's a big misconception, and that is my employer doesn't have this program. My employer doesn't allow people to take mini retirements. It's not something they do. It would never be an option. So, my only option is to leave. And they might not have a program. They might not have allowed other people to do this before, but there's a way to kind of set yourself up for a high success rate. I constantly have people that tell me, "Oh, there's absolutely no way. There's no way this could happen." And then they're like, "You wouldn't believe the conversation I just had. This is crazy." And I'm like, "Well, it's not that crazy, but I'm glad you're happy." But there's an element that I took some HR classes in college, and a huge theme in HR is this idea of the cost to interview, the cost to hire, the cost to train, the cost dollar wise, the cost time wise. It's so much easier to keep a good employee than to start that entire process. I was at a campfire and someone, kind of raised their hand and was like, "Yeah, I mean, I get this for like hourly employees or like low-level employees. It totally makes sense. I'm a CFO. There's no way my company's going to give me a month off. It's never going to happen. Like, I'm too important and I'm too critical for the mission," which is a sentiment that I hear a lot. You have no idea how essential I am in my company. They could never lose me. And so I frame it a different way. So, in this role, like, how long is it going to take them to interview someone to replace you? He's like, "Oh, that's a long process. Yeah, that's like 6 months." I'm like, "Yeah. How long does it take to train someone to get up to speed to where you're performing now?" It's like, "Oh, that's a long like 6 months, a year, maybe." Yeah, and then there's risk that they won't be as good as you. And they might have to start this entire process over. So we're in it for at least a year of low productivity in your role. Don't you think it might be easier for them just to give you a month off and they can skip all of that and you just come back and keep doing your job?
Oh my God. Do they want 2 years of pain
Yes.
or 1 month of somewhat discomfort?
Yes. And when you have, I talk a lot about like the power of leaving and not in a like, give me what I want or I'm going to leave because you suck way, but you have to understand it shifts the dynamic. Because if you come to HR and you say, hey, I want you to solve this problem, or you can just say no, the answer's no. Like we always go with the easiest and the cheapest solution. And if an option is just no, we're going to go with that because that saves us a whole bunch of hassle. But when you alter the equation by saying, or else it's going to be a real bummer, but I guess I'm going to have to separate from the company. Now you've put a lot of effort and a lot of time and a lot of cost on that option. So if you can bring a simpler, easier alternative, a cheaper alternative to the table, more often than not, they'll lean towards whatever's easier and cheaper, which might just be giving you a couple months off.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly makes sense. And it's funny, so many of these concepts, they seem self-evident
Yeah.
after you explain them so beautifully, Jillian, but they're not self-evident on the front side of this because you just think, you go back to, like you said, they don't have a program like this. They've never allowed this before anybody else. They've always said no. They could never do. You could come up with this litany of reasons why it won't happen. Or you can realize you have power. And like you said, this is not an antagonistic, oh, I'm going to lord over you with my power here. Because at the end of the day, it's a company and you are replaceable. Let's be entirely clear. But everybody's going to do what's in their best interest. And if for the company, it's going to take 6 months to find a replacement, plus maybe a year of low productivity or more, or in this hypothetical, a month off or 2 months off, okay, I think we all know what their best interest is, but it may need to be explained to them in that manner
Mhm.
also, right? Like open communication, we talked about fairness. If you treat this as a potential win-win, or at least not a lose, one side clearly losing, then there might be an easier way to get to yes on this, I would imagine.
Yeah, it takes preparation and it takes the right mindset. Like I always tell clients, like the work responsibilities on you. You're going to have to use a lot of empathy of like, what are the challenges? What are the problems that they're instantly going to be like, and how do we deal with this? And then you need to think about solutions and bring those solutions to the table. The process is going to have to be creative and collaborative. Like you're not dumping a problem in their lap and saying, you better fix this, and you're going to have to be patient. It's going to take a number of meetings, a number of conversations. But if you come to it with this attitude of like, I would love to figure this out. I can foresee some of these challenges you're going to have. I've got some ideas for solutions, but like, I would love to dialogue about this to where they know you're not, yeah, you're not just dumping a problem on them. You really are trying to figure this out. And you have to know what compromises you're willing to make because sometimes there is that one weird thing. For my one client who took the mini retirement, like there was an end of the month task that had to be done. And to hire a temp and to hire it was a sticking point. And she was like, you know what? If I can get the whole summer off with my kids, I can come in for 6 hours at the end of the month, one day a month. Like I can do that. Like that's not going to derail any of my plans. If you have a Friday meeting that happens on 4, there's absolutely no way that the company can survive without you being in that meeting. Maybe you're like, you know what, I can handle a 1 hour meeting once a week. If that's what it takes to make this work, that's a concession that won't derail the intention of my mini retirement.
Right. And it doesn't completely invalidate the concept of
Yeah.
your mini retirement. It's not like a sacrosanct, it has to be 100% no work in essence.
Yeah.
Be reasonable, right? Work with them. Because at the end of the day, in the vast majority of these mini retirements, you are going to go back to the company that you were working with. That's kind of the point here. We talk obviously about the potential to go to another company and potentially earn more money, but for most people are reasonably happy or satisfied. Like they're in their job, etc. They've negotiated this, and that might be a broad brush, obviously, that most people are happy or satisfied in their jobs. But let's suspend disbelief for a second, and they're going to go back to that job. So the last thing on earth you want to be is antagonistic, right? So okay, if it means that little concession, then okay, so be it.
And it's actually a strong theme I see in my work, and it's kind of a stumbling block for people taking mini retirements is that they love their company, they love their coworkers, they love the type of work they're doing. They see a future at this company. They're well compensated, and they might even classify as kind of a dream job. And so the idea of losing that is a huge loss. But there's also these other parts of their life that need some attention, that need some time, that need some nurturing that are also really important to them. And so, how do we not sacrifice all of the good stuff we have going professionally, but honor these other areas of our life that, there's seasons of life with expiration dates. There's things that if you don't do it now, it's going to pass you by. This idea of like a once in a lifetime opportunity, I get this a lot with like entrepreneurial clients. They take a mini retirement and they're like, there's this once in a lifetime opportunity that just showed up. Like, how do I say no? And I say, well, once in a lifetime opportunities actually come along quite often. But your kids being 10 and 14 right now, that is truly going to happen once in your lifetime. And once it's gone, they will never be 10 and 14 again. So if you want to lean into this season, you might need to find a way to put a pause and kind of prune down this other area of life.
And Jillian, the last thing I was curious about was, all right, you are thinking about this mini retirement. You are maybe negotiating it. We talked clearly about some of the pitfalls and issues that might arise when you're on the mini retirement, let's say. But are there a couple of tools, tips, tactics, et cetera, like things you should think about for how to actually plan it? Like maybe like nuts and bolts type things that people could just think about in terms of actually planning the mini retirement?
The first big thing, and we've kind of touched on it, is what is the intention of this mini retirement? And with the idea of retiring often, this isn't a one and done. You don't have to fit every purpose in life, every passion in life, every, value that matters to you in this one mini retirement, because hopefully you retire often. And this is one of 5, of 10, of 20 different mini retirements. So they can each have their own flavor, but figuring out what's the intention for this one. What do I need the most right now? Is there something urgent or is it just something important? Is there something that there might be an expiration date on? You feel that season of your life starting to pass you by. Maybe that's time with your parents. You're like, if I don't travel and do hiking with them now, I don't know if their knees are going to do it in 10 years. Or for me, we did a 10-week trip with our kiddos in a pop up camper. We did 10 national parks a number of years ago. And I remember being on that trip and just feeling like, oh, this isn't a season that's going to last forever. Like, my kids were maybe 3 to 11. In 10 years, the 5 of us are not going to be in a pop up camper in national parks for 10 weeks. Like, we will have missed it. And so we
Yeah.
do it now, or we say, yeah, that's never going to happen. Or sometimes there's just like we change. I took an amazing trip when I was in my mid 20s. We did, me and a friend, cross country road trip for a month in a car, slept on people's couches. We camped. There was one morning we were in Yellowstone and we woke up and I was like, I'm going to go to the bathroom. And I unzip the tent and I look out and I zip it back up. And my friend goes, I thought you were going to go to the bathroom. And I unzip it for her. And there's like 1,000 bison knees because we are the
Oh my
only
God.
tent in this campsite. And hundreds of bison are just meandering past us and there's snow everywhere. And it was like such an incredible experience. And I'm never sleeping on the frozen ground again. That season of my life is over. I'm done. I don't sleep on any ground, actually. I'm like 100% in camp mattress now. And so sometimes there's just things in our life that, like, if we don't do it now, will we be interested in that in 10 years? Will we feel, any pull towards that idea? So picking that intention, and you can have 2 or 3 intentions, but don't try 20 intentions and don't wing it and go in with 0 intentions.
Nice. Yeah, I love that. And the seasons of life. I think you've introduced that term to us many, many times and I use it repeatedly. It's a really important one to think about those seasons of life. And you never know when they're going to pass you by. Sometimes you do know, like you said, when you're overtly saying, "Hey, my kiddos are these ages, 10 years from now, there's a high likelihood this is not happening. And that's really important. Like you said, sleeping on mattresses, or I think about like I did a backpacking trip through Europe, fairly short one with my brother, and we would sleep in hostels in those dorm style
Yep.
rooms. And there's no way on earth I would do that now. I can't even imagine it. But at that time, that was what you did, and it was great, and it was normal. But that season has passed, and it is what it is. It's not good, better, and different. It's just okay. This is just the reality of my life now. So different seasons of life. I love that.
Yep. And I encourage people like lean into that season. I've been interviewing people for the Retire Often podcast, and one of them, a mutual friend, Chad Carson, Coach
Yeah.
Carson, he's done 3 of them. And it was like the first one was like a budget one because they, were still in that building phase. And then it was like a mid price one. And then a few years later,
Mm,
now it's like a little bit more of a luxurious one. Like there's a mini retirement for every budget. And it doesn't have to look one way. You can start with like the cheaper options. And then as you grow in your financial independence, as that financial freedom increases, like save the luxury Paris getaway 5-star hotels when you're 60 and 70 and you're rolling in cash. Like you can do the backpacking in youth hostels in your 20s and like slowly upgrade throughout the years.
yep. Wholeheartedly agreed. Jillian, this has been amazing. Thank you, as always, for coming on. I love the conversation. I know you have a book in the works in the beginning stages, so nobody gets your hopes up right now, certainly. But on this very topic, and I personally can't wait to see that come to reality. So thank you for coming on. And where can people find you nowadays? What's the best way to get in touch?
Yeah. So we're starting a brand new podcast, Retire Often, that'll go with the book. So if you want retirement stories, mini retirement stories, that'll be out in September. And it'll just be stories about people's mini retirements, what they did, what worked, what didn't work, what kind of that transformation was. And there'll be a website, Retire Often, where you can find all of that information.
All right. Well, that's certainly easy enough to remember. Retire Often. There will be a website and a podcast. So be sure to search for it. And yeah, until next time, Jillian, thanks again.